Okay, thank you. I'll speak in English, even though, of course, I'm Belgian. Okay, I'll be brief. I'll try to be brief. There's so much I can say about EASO operational support, but I won't go into details too much. Thank you, Mr. De Brouwer. I see he left the room now, for raising the attention of EASO's profile now that we're already linked to the solution to Dublin problems. In the future, let's see how far that goes. I can come back to that later. But regarding EASO operations, we provide operational support as defined in our founding regulation. We provide support to member states subject to particular pressure within the framework of operating plans and through the deployment of asylum support teams. So this is what our regulation says. There has been a big evolution in EASO support, and especially people who have been around for a long time will surely know this. In 2012, when we started our operational support, this was very much just capacity building in the style of twinning arrangements, organizing trainings, etc. It's a bit like the support that we now offer rather to third countries, for instance, in the Western Balkans. So that were very small teams, just a few experts who traveled around and spread their knowledge. But then, of course, the so-called crisis came, 2015, 2016, and suddenly EASO was supposed to be everywhere, do everything. The first push was with the whole relocation program, where suddenly we had to basically run relocations, go and find applicants who could be eligible for relocation, and then do the whole process. And then very quickly also the EU-Turkey statement came, which was a big change, of course. And here again, suddenly we had to be present in all the hotspots on the Greek islands, but also in Italy, in all the hotspots, and do things. It took a while before it was clear what it was that we needed to do, but now I think we're in a much different place. So I think there's also an evolution in the type of supports. We had the big surge in emergency support, where indeed it was all about having feet on the ground, or hands in the dirt, let's say. Now we're still there, and actually we're increasing our support also, for instance, in Greece. But we're looking much more in terms of sustainability and even exit strategies, which in the case of Greece may be a bit too soon, but still we're thinking about it. Our operating plans are yearly plans. We're actually now concluding them for next year. There's always a bit of negotiation ongoing with the host member states, but they're very much now based on very thorough needs assessments. So it's no longer, and I think that's also a difference compared to the past, it's no longer just Greece or Italy or Cyprus asking something from EASO and we deliver. No, we actually have our own needs assessments, prioritized needs assessments, and we agree together on what the needs are. We work through deployment of asylum support teams. Maybe important to note that initially the idea was, of course, that this would be teams of member state experts. So people from, for instance, the national asylum or reception bodies who would be deployed to EASO and then operational for certain periods of time in the EASO operations on the ground. Like I will show you later, this is less and less the case now. So we're broadening this definition of asylum support teams. Luckily enough, in our regulation, it's not defined, so that leaves some room for us. What I will briefly cover is, of course, the main operations we have in Greece, Italy, Cyprus, and now quite recently also in Malta. I'll just briefly mention external dimension. We have third country support, so that's more capacity building, but also we work on resettlement, where at least one element is quite operational, and I'll just briefly mention that one at the end of the presentation. And then I was also asked to say something more about our role with regard to ad hoc disembarkations and voluntary relocation exercises. I won't go too much into budgets. Okay, so this is a slide that has a lot of information. I'm sure those slides will be shared at some point. But just gives an overview of the type of support that we have in all those countries. And I'll just briefly mention what will happen in 2020 also. So here, for instance, in Greece, we focus, of course, very much on backlog reduction, or rather backlog stabilization, because it's impossible to reduce at the given in the given situation with the big influx that we have seen since the summer. We do this in the first instance in both the border procedure, the regular procedure. We provide information, we register, we do the asylum interviews, and we draft opinions. Very important to note, we do not take decisions. We don't have the mandate to take decisions. That's, of course, fully within the sovereignty of the host country. We also provide specific support for first and second line reception, including also the hotspots, but also development of reception monitoring frameworks. We support the Dublin unit, specifically with regard to outgoing requests. So that's more, especially in terms of Greece, that's more facilitating family reunification, rather. And we also support second instance through secondments to the appeal authorities. They, again, don't take any decisions. They prepare files. They help with CY research, etc. For Greece, it's worth noting that, of course, the situation is extremely critical. It has been critical for a while, but at some point, the numbers went down. Since the summer, we see a complete reverse in the situation again. We have now over 40,000 people stuck on the Greek islands. The capacity is 9,000. So that shows how dire the situation is. I'm sure you've seen images on TV, but it is really bad. There is a new government in Greece. They are trying to turn things around. Their ideas meet quite a lot of criticism, but we'll have to see how they are being implemented. I think it's very much still a question, an open question of how it will work. Even we don't really know what is now expected from us in 2020. There have been ideas floating around also about turning, for instance, hotspots into closed reception centers. How that will work, whether this will work, and how this will impact our support is still to be seen. We are planning to scale up massively in Greece next year. We have now, this year we had at any given moment around 200 caseworkers or personnel in the Greek islands mostly, but also on the mainland we have information provision, we have mobile teams, etc. But we will be more than doubling this. So there will be something like 400 caseworkers deployed by EASO. We are going towards a different model also of engagement. Until now, we very much worked in as directly managing our teams, which will not be possible if we go towards such big numbers. It's also not really sustainable, because what we did in practice was creating a parallel system. Next to the Greek Asylum Service, there was then EASO. So what we've been trying to do this year is going much more towards secondment. We have seconded now staff already the full year for registration, so we are not registering, it's the Greek Asylum Service with our support registering. And so this will be also rather the model for the casework, to avoid that we work in parallel systems, that we have parallel instructions, different templates, etc. So this embedded model would then be coupled with much more support also to the quality, central quality unit of the Greek Asylum Service. The whole idea is that the Greeks take more control than before. I think it's also specifically in this government the message they want to give, that they want to be more responsible, whereas the previous government very much always said that this was an EU problem that had to be solved by the EU. So where this will go in practice, we'll have to see. But for sure, we foresee a very big increase in numbers next year. So there will be less member state experts, because in Greece, they put it actually in their law that they need Greek-speaking caseworkers. So the member state experts that we will still use will be more, I believe, for reception, for strategic support, for quality measures, etc. So less boots on the ground. When we go to Italy, there we also support the casework, but in a different way. So here we have never done interviews. Actually, by law, we cannot. So we don't draft opinions. Also, we help them with casework. So the preparation of files, which can be many different things. It has helped to turn around the backlog in Italy. Of course, the biggest success there was due to, well, the flow actually being stopped under Salvini. But at least in terms of backlog, we did help with reducing the backlog by 50% in just 1 year time. We also support the Dublin unit, we support the COI unit, etc. Malta, very new. We only started there in July. We started being involved in Malta as a result of those ad hoc disembarkations, so the boats arriving and then leading to extreme pressure on the very small asylum and reception system. But that was a way in for us to now also provide support really to the asylum, to the Central Asylum Service, which is the Commissioner General. We provide information, we register, we do asylum interviews, and we draft opinions, very much like what we did so far in Greece, but then, of course, without the complications of the border procedure and admissibility. Cyprus, more or less the same. We do a lot of information provision, first instance, registration, asylum interviews, drafting of opinions. We will start with second instance as well, in the same way as we're doing in Italy. And we have quite a lot of reception support as well in Cyprus, and especially there, I think FedAsyl has been extremely valuable in providing good experts. What we see in general, I think, is that there is an increase. Okay, Italy, technically we're reducing our support. So there it's more shifting our support from the first to the second instance, just because the inflow has stopped, more or less. But for Malta and Cyprus, we are looking in doubling or tripling our operations because the pressures are real. Then, of course, the question is always, how much can EASO actually do? Because already now we are very much entering sometimes gray zones. We are working at the very edge of our mandate. And that is sometimes problematic. Even just the fact that we were doing interviews, that we are drafting opinions in Greece and now also in the other countries, is being questioned. Do we actually have the legal mandate to do so? It has been confirmed, at least in Greece, by the Supreme Council that we can. So there were court cases about this, but still, it's not defined necessarily in our relation. The regulation mentions that we can support the initial assessment, whatever that means. So. Here there is already the EUA, the European Union Agency for Asylum regulation. The draft of this has been on the table for a long time. There was already a political agreement since the end of 2017. But then everything kind of got stuck. So for us, of course, it would be very important that we see this moving forward. It seems like there's a new dynamic now recently with more and more actors saying that they are willing to decouple the EUA regulation from other drafts that are on the table in terms of the asylum package. So let's see. At the same time, we see now also push forward for potentially going towards a radical, much more radical change. So not just the EUA regulation that is on the table, which is much more regularizing actually what we are already doing, but going into dimensions that are of a different nature. And that's, for instance, what Mr. De Brouwer mentioned, where, for instance, we would also be responsible for deciding which migrants go where or which applicants go where. And if you have to read some of the non-papers that are floating around, we would basically do all the assessments or primary assessments at all the external borders. So there's a lot of question marks about all of that. It's also non-papers, which means that I shouldn't be even mentioning them. But these are just ideas, but it does show that there's a new dynamic, I think, whereas until recently it was all stuck, and also the EU EASO was not necessarily in the best position. Now suddenly there's much more interest, and there seems to be also more trust that an EU agency can actually do this. So that in a sense is good. Moving forward, just to show a little bit what kind of budget we're talking about for 2020, our operations would cover close to 70 million, and that's it might actually even be a little bit more, and that's 50% of the whole EASO budget. So, of course, EASO does much more than operations. We have trainings, we work on information analysis, on tools, on quality, etc. But still, in terms of budget, the operations are clearly the most important. Then something that is always mentioned, and I mentioned before when I started, the whole idea of asylum support teams was supposed to be member state experts deployed. That is no longer the case at all. If you look at this, I won't go into detail, but if you look at the black, that's the member state experts compared to the totals of deployed experts. So I think now we're at something like 13% of all the deployed experts in our operations. There are different reasons for that. I think in the beginning it was mostly just because, well, there was a question of how much solidarity should there be. I think that was more the political dimension. But also more and more member states say, well, we need our people at home. I think Belgium is one of them, due to the asylum situation in their country. But also more and more a question of what are our experts actually doing there? Does it lead to any success, especially in the case of Greece, where it seems to be there's this idea that Greece is a bit of a bottomless pit. You can keep putting resources into it. Now, I think the most important reason for us, at least, is also linked to just language requirements. In Italy, the Italian system does not really welcome experts that do not speak Italian, except maybe for information provision or some small activities. And now, like I said, also in Greece, they have now put it in their law that EASO experts should be Greek-speaking, at least for the casework. So in terms of first and second instance support. So there as well, there's less and less possibility even for member state experts to be deployed. Those opportunities are still there for Cyprus and Malta, but we see also small numbers there. So our model has actually changed a lot. We use locally recruited staff through service providers. So those are our temporary agency workers or interims, which of course we train ourselves, we follow up ourselves, but it is not the model that was envisaged, and we have also had some challenges because of that, contractual challenges and the Court of Auditors, for instance, not really liking this. On the other hand, there's no alternative for the moment. So we are looking, of course, into other possibilities, like expert rosters, etc. But I don't think it's that easy. So that's one of the big challenges for us. Of course, getting the resources in terms of manpower to do what is needed in a volatile situation where everything changes all the time, including legislative changes, of course. For instance, in Italy, the Salvini decree, I'm sure you heard about this, which was suddenly much more restrictive, did have impact also on our operations, where suddenly we felt compelled to stop providing certain types of support. But also there's of course the lack of office space. We're in the hotspots. That means that there's security risks, there's health and safety risks. We regularly have to evacuate our staff because of riots, things like this. It did calm down for a while, but I think now the most recent months, due to the congestions of the camps, it's very much on the table again. I was in Chios last Monday. 1 hour after leaving, there was a riot and all staff had to be evacuated. Actually, they couldn't because they were stuck inside. There had to be tear gas, etc., etc. So it is not a happy picture, I have to say. Under the EUAA, just to come back on the resources under the EUAA proposal, it says that there should be a reserve pool of 500 member state experts who should at any given moment be ready to leave and support EASO. Of course, again, seeing what the situation is now, especially with language requirements, etc., one could ask the question what the relevance of this pool would be. So probably this will not be the solution to everything. Then quickly on ad hoc disembarkations. There have been, here we're talking about the boats, often NGO vessels, arriving in Malta or Italy. They get a lot of media coverage. There was, of course, the whole issue, especially under Salvini then, of boats not being allowed to enter the ports, being stuck on the sea, etc. There have been attempts to have a more structured approach to this. EASO got only involved in 2019. There were boats already, of course, in 2018. There were already relocation events before, but we only got involved in 2019. These things are very much under the coordination of the European Commission. What happens is there is a boat, the European Commission calls member states to make pledges, and then when there are sufficient pledges for relocation, the boat can disembark, and then we start with our support. We now have a system, we called it the Messina model, because that was the first time that we were using this, where at least there's clarity about the legal framework. Before, this was not the case. It was really very much ad hoc, bilateral solutions between member states, just with laissez-passers and without a necessary framework. They were not necessarily even registered as applicants. Now all of this is the case, so we register them as applicants. And that means that then also the Dublin system can be used for take charge requests. We have so far responded to 19 events. It doesn't cost, for our budget at least, it doesn't cost that much money, so that's not a reason not to do it. We have managed to build up capacity, also using in-house capacity, but also by redirecting persons who were already supporting operations. We have now, I'm sure you heard about this, the Malta Declaration. A few months ago in Malta there was a declaration which called for other member states to also engage in more of these ad hoc disembarkations and voluntary relocation. It was not very successful, to say the least. So it is still a handful of member states who are engaged in these activities. But it is interesting also in terms of what our support is. Of course, we do again information provision, registration, interpretation, but I think the most important role that we have now is actually the matching, which goes a little bit into what could be the next step also in a future Dublin solution. So what we do in terms of avoiding cherry picking, because that was the case before, the first member state who would arrive, there was always one, who would arrive already the next day and just cherry pick the best migrants in the sense of those who could have the highest international protection needs and then could easily go through the national asylum system, leaving then for the last ones, the ones that were least desired. So we developed very much together with the Commission a matching system where there were at least some criteria, building further on the existing Dublin criteria, but also making sure that there's more of a just and fair distribution, so that we wouldn't have desired nationalities all go to one member state, and avoiding also that the hosts, or no, Malta or Italy, would get stuck with all the others. So this matching, it existed already before under the relocation program, the large-scale relocation program 2016-2017, but we picked it up again, and it could be also an inspiration for future endeavors. Here you just see the total numbers. So for Malta it was 620 more or less, and for Italy 1,743. in the general picture, these are small numbers, and that's also why, for instance, for Greece and Cyprus, they're quite frustrated that the whole political debate and media attention that goes to these disembarkations is not really in line with the numbers that they have to face every day. Especially in Cyprus as well, we now see boat arrivals, but they're kind of completely out of this picture. And very quickly, because I have been talking for too long, like I said before, we have external dimension activities as well. I won't mention third country support, so we have lots of capacity building activities in Turkey, Western Balkans, some in the MENA region as well. But specifically on reception, we have this pilot project which is quite interesting, relevant, and possibly replicable in other countries. So we have a resettlement support facility in Istanbul. It's managed by ICMC, which offers resettlement support to member states who want to fulfill their pledges. So it's really logistical support. And it works quite well. We have 6 member states on board. Belgium was one of them, is one of them, I would say. But of course, as we heard before, their resettlement is on hold. So we do hope we can welcome them again in 2020. And this will be evaluated. In total, we will resettle 1,500 persons from this facility under the pilot project. But we hope that this will just be the start, and at least for some smaller member states who have very little capacity or expertise in resettlement, this has proven to be a very good model. Okay, and I will stop here because sorry for going over time.
Hartelijk dank. Buitengewoon interessant en dank u ook om